Hey guys, thanks for joining us this Friday for a discussion on cybersecurity, another discussion on cybersecurity, I should say. With Schwab coming out recently and saying they're going to start requiring cybersecurity insurance for their advisors, and I thought this would be an interesting time to bring the topic to the public and let them join in on the conversations we're having with our clients, and maybe you can add to the conversation. So glad you're able to join us today. So those that don't know me, my name's Brian Hahn. I'm the founder at MTradecraft, and about 90% of our clients are SEC registered financial institutions. And we work alongside them as a brain trust, working on both intelligence and cybersecurity related issues. I think it's always important to know the background of who you're getting an opinion from. And so, to that, I think it's important that, we don't sell cybersecurity insurance, and we don't have anyone that we recommend to purchase policies from. So we just don't have that. And I think you'll see why here in a little bit. And two, there's a little bit of a joke in the title of it's a waste of money, but I want to reiterate, you absolutely have to have a policy. And we'll talk about that today. And two, I'm not an expert. I think I have a very unique perspective in that I've read a lot of policies, and this is a very important topic for MTradecraft. And I think many people would argue that I'm wrong on my viewpoint. And for those that would, and for those that have an unbiased opinion, I'd like for you to point out, where we're wrong so that we can have better information for our clients and of course, lead them down that discussion. And here I'm only poking fun at Schwab. Schwab came out and made the requirement, but I think we're pretty soon going to see it to be a standard mandate across pretty much every industry. So let's start. You need a cybersecurity insurance policy. I think there's three simple facts we can all agree on. One is that the SEC and Schwab don't care about your excuses of why you don't have one. If they say you need one, you have to get one. Your clients care. Your clients think that you have these policies and procedures in place. I promise you, that they expect you to have them. And you don't want to have those conversations with them that you don't. And I can tell you the guy being questioned during an examination cares if you have one, because if you don't have one during an examination, that's going to become a hot topic and one that's not fun to manage. So what's the concern? What concern do we share with our clients, and what concern do we want to share with you today? It's my opinion that today's policies do not reflect real world. And the policies cannot reflect the real world because the real world cannot be calculated in terms of cybersecurity. Because of that, these policies by and large are written with language that allows the insurer to deny claims. And that's what I want to look at today. So to start, we look at the awkward math behind these policies. And the math around the modeling and pricing of these cybersecurity policies is very different from that of, say, how do you insure a building, right? If we know a building's location, we can get a fairly accurate statement in terms of what would it cost to rebuild from the ground up, what are the likelihood of tornadoes coming through, and all these things that with enough data points we can measure. And we simply don't have that with cybersecurity. So to the best of my knowledge, and this is a place where we could be corrected, but when we look at what's going on out there, we look at the actual calculation, the actuary math that's used to write these policies, and that's where it really starts to break down. I encourage you to read the white paper there to the left if you're entirely interested about this. It's basically 38 pages of these mathematics. And I think in every bit of the mathematics, there's something you can tear apart. But I'm going to look at two right here, which really kind of set the problem in the industry for us. One is if you look at this first little part of the equation, it basically is the total number of infections of nodes V up to a time t. In other words, how infectious is the virus or the malware or the exploit or the attack, whatever is going on. And we don't have enough data to determine that. So the calculation moves to human epidemic theory, literally how the virus is spread between humans. And I don't think it takes a PhD candidate to realize that there really isn't much connection between the way a computer virus spreads and the way a human virus spreads. So that's where the math starts to get kind of awkward and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And another point that we always look at, and I quote from the actual paper, a random cost that's the loss of information and the modeling of first-party legal cost. So in other words, they are assigning random, and again, please correct us if we're wrong on the math here, but they are assigning random cost for information and the modeling of first-party legal costs because there's just not enough information out there for them to get an accurate calculation on this. And because you can't get an accurate calculation, you have insurance companies that sell these policies, and they're underwritten on this faulty calculation, and so they make up on it on the back end in the language. And so let's dive into that. The first that we see is the Act of War Exclusion. And if you've seen any of our hacking demonstrations, you'll see, one of the first things we do when we're testing our clients is we route our traffic through the Ukraine and Russia and Belarus and Spain, because we want to see, how do our clients detect that? Do they take a threat from, if it's a US-based firm, do they take a threat from Russia a potential threat from Russia more serious than they take one from the US? So we route our traffic everywhere, and there's no attribution to that traffic, which again we'll dive into later, which means when you look at these attacks, you could easily say that because the traffic originated from outside of the insurance company, it could be an act of war. And in fact, when you look in the real world, we see this playing out in a very major lawsuit between Mondelez, which is a snack food company that was hit with ransomware that I think cost a six-figure, $6 million in damages. And Zurich refused to pay. Zurich Insurance Company refused to pay, claiming this war exclusion. So this is a major case you can look at to see how these actually play out in the real world. And of course, as you dive in, you'll see plenty of smaller cases as well. There's also the reasonable cares exclusions, right? And this is basically when lawyers start thinking like geeks and pointing fingers and saying things like, you failed to maintain your systems, you failed to follow procedures, or there was some human and employee error. And I've yet to see a policy that did not contain at least some form of this language. And that's very problematic for us, because when you take these three things, failure to maintain systems, failure to follow procedures, and human and employee errors, and apply them to the real world of hacking, you basically leave every claim open to being denied. So this is some industry level stats that I pulled below. Basically, when they looked at a scope of attacks, what element was in that attack. So within their research, 71% had phishing, 50% had a exploit of an unpatched vulnerability, and so on. So let's start with these. Phishing. Okay, 71% of attacks. I can tell you internally with the SEC firms that we deal with, we're probably closer to 90%. So it's a bigger number for us. But that could easily go down to human and employee error or failure to follow procedures, right? Maybe you have a policies and procedures manual that states employees should not click on suspicious emails, and that's as blanket as you get. And they click on something and they're phished. Now that's an out for the insurance company. Let's look at unpatched vulnerabilities. You could say that's failure to follow procedures. Your procedures say you're going to maintain systems and you didn't. It said you were going to patch them and you didn't. Distributed denial of services are almost always going to be on unmaintained systems, unpatched systems. So when you apply these exclusions to the real world, it almost always leaves an out for the insurance company to step out and say, hey, we're not paying. And diving in deeper, what is reasonable care? When we do our audits, we use this graphic for a small firm and say, hey, for us, this is reasonable care. These are all the things that we're going to check. These are the different systems we're going to test. And, we try to be as inclusive as possible and produce as much documentation as we can. Again, 'cause we don't know what reasonable care is, and we have to go overboard in producing that kind of documentation. So, how do you define reasonable care? Reasonable care is much different for a firm that has custody or for Goldman Sachs than it is for the single manager with $100 million working from a home office. So how do you define reasonable care? And I think even further, what is reasonable care in this work from home environment that we have now? When we look at the language from the SEC during the examinations in the past, we know they wanted to see internal vulnerability scans and penetration tests. But for us, that's probably a little out of bounds to ask employees to be going through penetration tests and audits at home, because employees have Alexas, they have Roomba robots, Ring doorbells, and these things are all extremely vulnerable. And so, are we going to scan them and light up a vulnerability report? And if we don't, are we maintaining reasonable care? So again, that's just a question that has to be addressed at every firm. If you have an admin sitting at home and maybe all he does is marketing, maybe it is reasonable not to scan that home. Whereas if you have a Bitcoin trader running on a custom server and some custom built apps, maybe it is reasonable care to scan that home. So again, just a lot of questions. When we see this language, it's just never clearly defined, and it leaves a lot of open to interpretation. It used to be we'd tell our clients, hey, at least the policy has some benefit if you get hit with some ransomware and you have to pay a ransom, right? Maybe we could at least rely on the policy to pay that. Now that's not even possible, because the Treasury Department said, hey, hackers are terrorists. You don't know where the money's going. You could ultimately be funding terrorism. So you can't even pay ransoms anymore. And for a lot of firms, that used to be, kind of a risk cost analysis. They'd say, hey, it's going to cost us, $400,000 to secure the server, or we can take our chance with a, $500 a year cybersecurity premium in hope that any ransomware is taken care of and there's no major damages. So in a lot of ways, it's good that they can't pay that. Whether the insurance companies, they first came out and said, hey, we're not going to pay it anymore because they wanted to stop ransomware because it was becoming very profitable. But now the Treasury Department's also saying that you can't pay it. And the last exclusion that I see, and I see this the rarest in the policies, and they seem to be moving away, but it's attribution exclusions. And I can tell you the only time we find attributions in the cases that we work on are when it's an amateur performing the hack. They made a mistake. They reused an IP address. They reused a password. They reused some screen name, something that we can link back to them. It almost always comes down to error. I think anyone with any real tradecraft that's attacking your firm, attribution is next to impossible in this. Further, I tell my clients, I think in a very realistic way, you shouldn't expect much action when you call the authorities. From the cases I've been involved in, the authorities simply don't care. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources, and it's just not on their radar to come help the single shop that was hacked or hit with ransomware. At best, you're going to get a report out of it, and that's it. And so, again, this is one of those exclusions that attribution is just, it's incredibly difficult. So given all our things, that we talked about, this is how we kind of present it to our clients and tell them, hey, this is going to be the reality of your cybersecurity insurance. First, you have to have it. Now, what you have to decide is if you want to just get a token policy on paper, or if you want to actually get something that you have a high level of reason that it could potentially pay off. When we look at the claims and the data that we have, they tend to be decided on a one-off basis. And that decision seems to be based kind of around the total cost of the damage of the claim, the insurance premiums that have been received so far, and the expected future cash flows from that client. That tends to go into kind of a legal profit analysis type algorithm, and then a claim decision is released. I think it's safe to say if you have an unauthorized wire transfer of $25,000, that's going to be paid. If you have an unauthorized wire transfer of $250,000, you're probably going to be in store for a major legal battle that you're just not going to be able to win. And so ultimately, this is what it comes down to, I believe, for our clients. When we talk about it, they have to think about these type of things. And I think when you look at it, this really kind of frames, well, how should we be building our network if we are dealing with extremely sensitive information? Should we be moving more to a zero trust environment? That sort of thing. So again, guys, thank you all for attending this discussion. I greatly appreciate you spending this Friday with us. Again, we're always looking to be, unbiased and have good information on these type of things. Again, it's in our best interest to know who has a good policy. So far, we haven't seen it. And we just haven't seen, the basis for when those policies are going to start coming out. Although I will say, in general, I think we're bullish on the industry and the ability to take this on. But we're a long way before, I think we're going to see policies that are worth the paper that we're written on. And I'm not knocking your policy. I'm really not. Again, I'm not an expert. I haven't read all the policies, but I've read enough to know what the red flags are that seem to be kind of rampant across policies. So I hope this is helpful for you and gives you some insight or gives you some kind of framework to start thinking about cybersecurity for your firm, and what kind of policy you need to put in place. So again, thank you for your time.